what's the easiest way to explain LIHTC to somebody? What does it actually mean to pull together a deal?
So over here, we have $50 million right here on the initial eligible basis. And let's say you're selling it for, let's just keep it simple, it's 90 cents a dollar. So $50 million is the qualified basis, and then you multiply that by 4%, which is a tax credit rate. That's $2 million in federal LIHTC money right there. And the way that it works is you get that for the next 10 years. So in reality, it's over 15 years, but you're able to collect it in 10 years. Those $2 million become $20 million of equity right there. And then whatever you're going to be selling them off at, like over here, 90 cents, now you get 17, almost $18 million in equity. 1 cent does make a pretty big difference, especially right now if you're looking anywhere between 87 cents to 93 cents. That's over $1 million difference right there just between the gap of what they're going for right now. Now, let's just say that we have 90 cents, and this is why the location of the site is very important, especially if it's on the Qualified Census Tract or DDA. With that basis boost, we're going over here from almost $18 million in equity, and now with the boost, we went to $23.4 million.
Ooh, this is good. So I want to make sure this is super clear for people, right? This is why they are incentivizing developments in areas that might be qualified census tracts or difficult to develop area, because it's hard to develop for a reason. And for them to incentivize this, they have to help you out on the capital raise part, specifically by providing you with more equity through the sale of these tax credits. And Will just showed that you went from 18 million to 23.4 million, almost a $5 million difference. But that's a huge number. That's $5 million you didn't have to borrow. That's $5 million you didn't have to go raise from a private lender or investor. And that's what makes this all kind of come together. And for the initial eligible basis, right, 50 million, that's not necessarily the entire cost to build the project, right? That's just the eligible basis. What types of costs are ineligible, I guess, for lack of better words?
Yeah. So the types over here that are ineligible, any type of project reserves, they're going to be ineligible.
And these are like contingencies, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. So any type of money that you're able to earn interest on, that's going to be ineligible. Like lease-up reserves, operating reserves, those are really the main ones. And then additionally, any type of miscellaneous soft costs. So any type of contingency money. Unfortunately, over here with this QAP, tenant relocation costs are not considered part of that. And then
that could be really expensive. Tenant relocation costs.
Yeah. And then, of course, FF&E, personal property, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So marketing, apartment fees, and any other additional miscellaneous costs. And then syndication costs.
And syndication costs are like the transaction, or maybe we'll call like a broker fee that you pay to the syndicator that sells the tax credits to the buyers.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. Right. Welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Guys, today I got Will Mejia. And he's a guy that knows finance, he knows the numbers, he knows the legal side. And when I first met this guy, and again, I'm so grateful that he responded to my message, but I was excited to bring him on because not that often do you get someone with a blend of skills that's so unique that can bring so much value to all of our listeners today. So I'm pumped, I'm honored. Well, welcome to the show today. How you doing, man?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. Excited to be here.
All right, let's freaking go, man. I am so excited for this one. And I've been pumped. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a couple weeks now, ever since I first met you. And man, let's just start with, man, who was Will and how did you even get into affordable housing in the first place, man?
All right. Well, it all started with just a vision of wanting to build affordable homes. And it was like single family residential specifically. Wanted to build some houses. My dad, he was a GC. And it's like, all right, let's do this. Let's do something good where we're able to make some money. And after trying to go out there, talking to investors and everything, had no success. At that point, I realized I wasn't really speaking the language. And that's me coming from a banking background, having worked in residential banking, but I didn't work in the investment side specifically relating to commercial-backed securities and how they're packaged, warehoused, and sold to the secondary markets and how investors really look at them. So at that point, I decided to go back to school, learn everything as much as I could. And now here I am, man.
Man, that's just a story of one, staying true to your roots, but two, not stopping when things got hard, right? Some people might have said, oh, they said no, this isn't meant for me. Let me just quit. Let me just stop. And you said, no, let me get more educated. Let me learn the skills. And the great approach to serving the community is reflecting you today just by coming onto the podcast to show and just do a brain dump of everything that you've learned. So tell us about some of the projects you have supported in the past so I can set the frame for the audience on why we're talking to you today.
Okay, yeah. So I've worked for developers in the past, and now I'm on the consulting side. So I've been involved with various projects, conception from pre-development all the way through disposition. And at various different stages, when it comes to affordable housing, I mean, there's just a labyrinth of different types of affordable housing. So we're talking about like rent, PVC, HCV, all these different type of projects. So when I say projects, don't think like down in the PJs or New York. There were projects, that's what we call the properties that are being developed. So just seeing different type of markets, Section 212, so anything from senior to family developments, and specifically specialized in multifamily. And so working with different partnerships with even local entities and going down through the individual like for-profit entities and nonprofit entities and seeing how they're all really trying to achieve a mission. Granted, the for-profit developers do have shareholders and everyone to pay and more about making money, and the nonprofits are more altruistic and they're really sticking to the roots where they're really trying to provide a service in affordable housing. So just understanding the nuance between the two and seeing how you're able to help them achieve their goals at the end. And so that's where I come in, working anything from 4% to 9% deals, which are the two type of LIHTCs that there are.
Oh, dude, you just teed it up for me perfectly, man. So, first of all, I like to emphasize that you have such a great breadth of experience from working with nonprofits and also for-profits. You've seen how people can come together, structure these deals, but also make them work. Now, you just talked about 4% and 9% low-income housing tax credits, which we'll call LIHTC for the rest of the show. What's the easiest way to explain LIHTC to somebody? Like if you had to explain to your kid, how do you even explain it? Have you come across any simple explanations on how you can describe to people what it even is?
Yeah, so that's funny because I've been going in and I knew that question was going to be asked, and just preparing for this, I went through different iterations and everything, and developers, they know all about development's iterative process. So you're constantly going back. So what is a tax credit? And a tax credit reduces taxpayers' taxes directly and does not depend on any tax rates. Tax credits are subtracted not from taxable income, but directly from a taxpayer's taxable liability, dollar for dollar. By contrast, the tax deduction reduces the taxpayer's taxable income, but not here. So you're getting dollar for dollar tax credit.
Got it. So if you owe $100 of taxes to the federal government, but you have $100 of tax credit, you get back that whole $100. You don't have to pay it, essentially.
You don't have to pay it exactly. Yeah, I mean, my example I have right here, $2 million tax liability and a tax rate of $1.5 million. And that's the thing, like when it comes to these tax rates, we're talking about like huge numbers. Well, once again, it's relative, but these are definitely in the millions of dollars when we're talking about tax credits.
Okay. All right. So this is great. How about the difference between 4% and 9% tax? Obviously, one sounds more than the other, but how do people typically digest it? Like, what kind of differences are there in projects that qualify for 9% versus 4%? How should people look at this, the difference between 4% and 9%?
Well, and that's really the thing. There's a few developments that I've seen where they're doing the 4%, and I'm like, you could be going for the 9%. And the 9% tax credits, that's a competitive round. So whenever you hear people talking about competitive or the 70% present value, they're talking about the 9% light tax. So the IRC Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended, which is referred to as the code. So anytime that people refer to the code, that's what they're talking about. Section 42H3 authorizes the states to allocate a limited pool of federal low-income housing tax credits to LIHTCs based on the state's population. So in 2024, it was $2.90. Next year, it's going up 10 cents, so $3 per capita. So on the population, that's like the census and everything's so important because it's like, hey, you have 5 million people living somewhere and it's $3 per person. You're looking at $15 million right there that you're able to allocate in tax credits. So that's how the 9% work. And the 9%, you get 70% of the present value. And that usually comes out in equity, 60 to 80% of total development costs for the development, which means that you only need to finance 40 to 20%, sometimes even less, I've seen. And then the difference is that the 4%, it's you're getting, or the 30% present value, you're going to finance a lot more because that's only going to cover 15 to 25%. So you're going to have to come up with the financing for up to like 70 to 80% of the project. So it's a really significant difference right there.
Yeah, I mean, you're considering how much debt you have to go get out, and obviously with debt, there's interest that you have to service on that debt. And when you talk about 4% and 9%, that's a great explanation, by the way. 60 to 80% of the capital stack, that makes people understand that a lot better. Because if you get the 9% tax credits, well, obviously you only need 20% debt. That seems like a great deal, right?
Yeah.
Way less, way less
Oh, absolutely.
amount
It's
of
more
debt you have to
feasible.
get. Oh, yeah. So are there any other sort of requirements, not even requirements, but or caps or type of projects that might get you in a better competitive position to win those 9% tax credits? Because we said it was competitive, but how do people typically even win them? Like, should people just give up because it sounds so competitive?
No, absolutely not. And it all really comes down to the application and how it scores. So usually you want to score at least a 180, unless if you're going for like the innovation or there's another award that is also at their discretion. But
Nope.
if you're going for like the innovation award, you don't have to score high or anything. It just needs to be something that it's like, wow, yeah, let's do this. And for 2024, the winning score was 180 was the
Wow. Okay.
lowest.
And how many projects got those 9% tax credits? Like, how many units are we talking about? And this is the state of Arizona, right? I want to confirm. Okay.
Yes. So in Arizona, per application, it was up to $2.5 million, three 9% LIHTC awards in 13 rural counties in new construction set aside, two tribal set asides, 11 rural new construction, four rehabs, and 17 new metro construction. Those were the applications that were received. And then I did my preliminary analysis. So as we could see, that's a lot of applications. And
Wow, that's a
then
lot of projects. And these are just applications for 9% tax credits? Am I
yeah,
catching
that's just
correctly?
for the, yeah. And you got to remember, you're spending like a lot of money in pre-development costs. So definitely there's a lot of pursuit costs when it comes to 9% tax credits. So definitely if you're able to make it work with the 4% as well, that's something where I also encourage people to apply for it. That way, just in case if it doesn't pass out and you don't get awarded the 9%, you can still turn around and go for the 4%.
Oh, can you simultaneously apply for the 9% tax credits and the 4% tax credits, or only after you fail the 9% you apply?
Right. After you're denied, then you would want to pursue, unless if you want to withdraw your application, but I haven't seen that happen.
I see.
So the awards here in Arizona for rehabilitation, it was one rehab, and then there were two tribal awards. There were three rural new construction awards and four metro new construction awards. Now, here's the caveat to that. One was a new construction choice neighborhoods. That's the other award. Look at that, right as I'm going into it. So you could do the choice neighborhoods or like the innovation or unique opportunities. So there was one for unique opportunities, and that was here in Maricopa County. And then we also have Pima County, which is considered metro as well. And that one received the choice neighborhoods award. Now, both of those had scored 170. And yeah, so the lowest regular scoring one actually was 185, not 180. Or no, there was one for 180, but that was tribal.
Wow. I mean, tons of applications, but it seems like between one rehab, two tribal, three rural, four new construction, that sounds like less than half, if I remember the numbers correctly, of people that applied. And you talked about the score of scoring at least 170, or if you have those innovation awards, or scoring at least 180. How do people figure out their score? Because I'm assuming this is the big part of what you do and what you help is helping them evaluate their projects. And before you go spend all this money in pursuing these 9% tax credits, like, do you even think you're going to, with your current plan, going to win those LIHTC credits? Like, how do people figure that out?
Right. And well, one, it's a self-scoring. So everything is listed in the qualified allocation plan, which we refer to as the QAP. So the self-scoring guidelines are right there. And then people also hire consultants like me to review their applications, review the sites, review what they're looking at doing. And then we have some that are like developer control and then some that are site control. That's what we break them down as. So that way it's like, all right, these many points, that's really up to you. And then these many points, that's specifically to the site. So if the developer is willing to do everything to earn all the points that are like within the developer's control, which everyone does, that's how you're going to be able to maximize your points.
That's great. So then for a developer, let's say, so my role is just underwriting, right? I don't know much about construction, but if I were to work with you and say, okay, well, you're giving me advice on what is sort of the most points that's within my control. I can take your advice and say, well, if I do this with this affordability requirements or whatever, or serve this or provide a services here to this population, this will cost me X amount of dollars. And if I go for that and I can't service my debt because of how much my operating expenses are, then that for me tells me I can't pursue that point. Was that a good way of looking at it? I just want to make sure I'm
Yeah.
kind of
No,
back up at you.
well, you got to make sure that it pencils out. I mean, in reality, if it doesn't pencil out, the project isn't going to be feasible, and they're going to see that in the underwriting because you also have your DCR, DSCR minimum ratios. So it depends if it's trending upward or if it's trending downward. So you need to have a minimum DSCR of 1.1 and it has to trend upward, or if it's trending downward, it has to be a minimum 1.35 or 1.4.
Wow. Okay. That helps a lot because I think what people fail to understand is that these tax credits that you're selling, I mean, these are people that are investing in your project as equity investors. You cannot just throw away their money thinking like I'm getting all these tax credits. You can't do that. There is a reputation risk to this piece of the project. And there's also execution risk. Just because you put it all in a fancy spreadsheet, but you don't know what went into that cell and how you're actually going to make those numbers, that's not going to work.
Right.
So don't be silly. Work with someone like Will to actually help you think through all these different steps and all these different considerations, because otherwise you might be setting yourself for failure. And sometimes we talk about second chances, but it's very hard for someone to take a second chance on you if you don't take care and don't express and don't take your fiduciary duties responsibly.
Oh, yeah. Very well said. Yeah. It really comes down to that. Yeah. You have a fiduciary duty to your investors, to your stakeholders, really, to be able to perform. And a lot of people that do affordable housing, they want to do it because they want to be able to provide a service and do some good. So, and the worst way to not accomplish that goal is by not being responsible from the start.
And well said, Will. And you have done so many projects now. Has there been any sort of like creativity or creative deal structure that you've seen that you can provide some general examples of to the audience? Because at the end of the day, with how complex these projects are, people literally ask me all the time, like, how do I structure this? And that's really because they don't even have an example of what's even possible. Can you share some examples?
Yeah.
Some creative deal
Absolutely.
structures you've seen in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of my favorite are where you're receiving different type of funds and grants to be able to put a project together, especially since like there's a lot of subordinate or deeply subordinate debt. Because right now with the financial environment that we're currently in, we're seeing developer fees being deferred a lot more, and by a lot more as well as like the quantity of amount, where even developers are providing their own sponsor notes to be able to close deals. And that's when you're not able to find different type of gap financing. So that's really where it comes tricky, and being able to work with like different like CDFIs or different like local groups or even national groups to be able to make the financing make sense, because the more money that you have, the more services, supportive services to be exact, that you're able to provide to your residents and to the tenants. So definitely I've seen a lot of like different like AHP combined with like, so once you go with the AHP, which is the Affordable Housing Program funds, your AMI changes, it reduces down to where it needs to be like at a weighted of like 50% or 30%, depending on the program that you're going for. So AHP funds are really great because those type of funds, they're forgiven as well, like after year 15.
Is this debt? Is that what you're talking about? HP funds?
Yes.
Okay. So if I were to kind of digest what you just said, you talk about subordinate debt and deeply subordinate debt. Let me take that piece first. What did you mean by deeply subordinate debt?
So deeply subordinate debt, that would be more of like the sponsor. So the developer, they're deferring all this fee, and they want to be able to get some of that developer fee up front as well, because on the 4%, there's no limit as far as to minimum or maximum as what you're able to defer. When it comes to the 9%, anything over $2.5 million has to be deferred. And those deferred fees, they have to be paid back within 15 years, and it needs to be able to pencil out in your cash flow. So that technically is not considered subordinate. That's a requirement of funds that has to be paid. But like if you go through the Arizona Department of Housing, if you get like housing trust fund money, home loan proceeds, different municipal like home funds, those become deeply subordinate. So the deeply subordinate debt, that's paid from cash flow, meaning that if you don't have any cash flow to pay that back, then they don't get paid.
That's really helpful. And for people that are trying to follow along, right? I mean, typically you have a capital stack. It's made of equity and you have debt.
Mhm.
Now, part of the capital stack includes soft costs, right? You have your hard costs for your construction materials and labor, but you have soft costs that includes interest reserves, permitting, labor. But developer fee is really what the developer uses to essentially keep the lights on, to pay their employees, to manage a project and make sure that it actually gets completed and built. Because lenders know if you don't pay someone a developer fee, then they're going to go work a minimum wage job just to go put food on the table. And that's not going to work, right? That's a tremendous amount of risk. And that's why there's a developer fee. And what Will was saying is the developer fee that you can defer towards the back of it, one, by maxing out your developer fee, increase your capital stack. But then when you defer it, now you don't need as much debt because that's what you're deferring. And as long as it gets paid out of future cash flows, that's how it works. But I love how you talked about the other deeply subordinate debt where some loans were given after 15 years as long as they meet certain stipulations. So I really love how you explained that one well. So let's talk about just a little bit of sequencing because we just talked about all this creative deal structure. Well, like, dude, I'm trying to keep my head straight. How do you what comes in first? Like, does the construction loan comes in first? You talked about AHP, ADOH, home funds. How does this all come together? Like, who wires money first? Sometimes that's just cripples my brain a little bit because I was like, oh my God, it hurts so bad. I don't even know how to keep it all straight. But how do you manage the flow of funds when this all kind of comes together? Make it real for us.
Yeah, okay. So that's the one thing about affordable housing development that comes down to regular like market properties. It's that it's really the same process. The developer is the one that's putting in the money at first, time, money, and they're the ones that are pursuing everything up front. And then after that, you're going to want to you're going to hire your team. So you're going to need consultants, you're going to need architects, civil engineers, structural engineers, surveyors, geotech engineers, landscape architects. I mean, we go everything. I mean, I have a whole list right here that I'm happy to share with you as well. So even like in your own model makers, traffic engineers, different type of analysis and third-party reports that you're going to have to do, you're still going to need to hire a CPA as well, because with any type of affordable housing development, you're going to need to get the final cost certification. They're going to have to give their CPA opinion saying like, yes, these numbers do make sense. These are real. And so all that gets submitted into the department as well. So the way that the 4% deals differ from the 9% deal is that the 4% deal it's mainly through bond financing. And the 9% deal is through traditional debt, which are like loans. And if you get a 9% deal, you actually are not able to take out bond financing to finance it. So that's the major difference between the two. At first, it's going to be the developer putting up a lot of money. And then once you close on your bond deal, there's like different reimbursements and everything that go into place. Then you have your construction loan. So from the bond financing, that goes into your construction loan. And then, of course, you have your different schedules and everything of how much equity your equity investor is going to be putting in at different like milestones. And then, of course, you have your stabilization one. And once you get to Form 8609, which that's really the whole goal of affordable housing for the equity partner, for the tax credit investor, is they want the Form 8609. That's the whole angle. Once you get your Form 8609, everything's signed, that's when you get your tax credits. So that's the finish line right there. And then it's just staying ahead of the finish line where, well, we'll go into this later on as far as like deficiencies and everything, Form 8823s and so on.
So you got to your 4% tax credits, right? And once you are getting your construction loan, does the money from the bonds come in first into the deal? And then, like you said, the equity investors that are buying the 4% tax credits, that's when they put in their capital at a stage area. It's not all at once.
Yeah, well, that's all negotiated too. So once again, one of the famous answers, and I'm going to say this as well, you'll hear from me, is that it depends. And that's all through negotiation. So if you're like, hey, at bond closing, the investor partner is putting in this much money, and then so much of these bond proceeds are going into for the construction costs, and then you have your construction of perm, whatever's going permanent, and then you have your taxable or tax exempt debt. So it just really depends on how everything is organized and structured.
I love that because it does depend. And one of your factors might just be what is your cost of capital, right? Like, what do you draw on first to make sure that you might be drawing as cheapest money, but you might have certain covenants. So I think about this correctly. I heard about the bond financing and 4% deals. They have to be at least 50% of the capital stack.
Correct. Of the aggregate base of the aggregate cost has to exceed 50%. Correct. Yeah, look at you. You've been doing some research on it.
I just keep asking questions to people like you, and I just pick up things every once in a while, man. I have you to thank for it. Honestly.
So yeah, and that actually has to be certified by the CPA. So that's part of the CPA opinion. They need to say, hey, more than 50% of the bonds are being used for the cost. And then of course you have like certain amount of eligible and ineligible costs, but that's a whole separate thing.
Well, I love that we brought that up because, well, that's how you decide how you draw on it. Because if you know you have to get about 50%, but you decide to draw on your equity piece first, but for some reason you don't finish getting that 50% due to bond financing, that's pretty significant trouble for your tax credit investors. So that's the stuff that you got to be really, really aware of. Now that we've just gone through how the flow of funds kind of come together, right? I'm assuming you get some grants there too. Like obviously that you would try to draw on that first because then you can defer some interest and not carry interest on the drawn values first, right? Is that a pretty good general rule of thumb?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You always want to use grant money, free money first.
All right, go figure. Sometimes I got to say it because otherwise other people don't really understand the stuff, right? So I love this. Now we just got the flow of funds selected. We talked a little bit earlier about what type of points are available to developers and what type of points are available to the site. Can you talk a little bit about just what points are awarded at project level in terms of the site? Because for people that are just looking at a piece of dirt, how would they even know am I qualified for a LIHTC project?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And here, let me go ahead and open up one of my analysis over here. So the scoring, when it comes down to it, when it comes to rehabilitation, it's going to score less. So that's a whole different like scoring system that they use. And then, so it's a maximum of 200 points. And if you're a developer, you need to have at least 7 projects under your belt. With that many, having a minimum of 7 projects under your belt, you get the maximum awards points. So that's 25 points right there. And then if you're providing like supportive housing, depending on the whole breakdown on the QAP, you're able to get a maximum of 30 points. Proximity to amenities, you're able to get a maximum of 35 points, and that gets broken down. So if you're like within like 2 miles of a park, or 2.5 miles of a park, a grocery store. So they want to make sure that it's not like in a food desert or something, because you want to be able to build these projects where you're near transportation, near a library, public park, and so forth. And
I love that. So it's not like people can thrive essentially, right? They're not just like out in the middle of nowhere where no one wants to live. Is like, dude, of course no one's going to live there because they got nothing. So when you talk about minimum of 7 projects, are these LIHTC projects specifically, or can they just be ground up construction? What does that look like?
No, it has to be LIHTC projects. Absolutely.
Well, for people that have never done a LIHTC project before, what have you seen work in terms of them still, if they got the right heart, they got the energy, but they're just like, I've never done it, and this is a game I can never be a part of. What do you say to them? What can they do?
Hey, find a mentor, be the co-developer, create a joint venture to get into it, and perhaps that way you see like, hey, this is something that I really could do, or really at that point, you're able to figure out if because it's very niche. So if it's something that you're like, yes, this is all me, and then you're going to go into it. And other people that are after the first project, they're like, you know what? It doesn't really make sense for me to do this. At that point, that's what I recommend. Just be a co-developer, create a joint venture, go in it with someone else and see if you could do that.
I love that. Well, because I just don't want people to give up, right? And if you've never done a LIHTC project before, maybe go find a land. Maybe bring someone that's powerful, like Will, to the table. It's like, hey, I know a guy who can help you look at this project. Or maybe a seller next door that you can lock up the piece of land on an option contract. And now all of a sudden you can bring a opportunity to someone that's already doing the thing, but you help them skip all of the work of prospecting leads and looking for the deal and negotiating on it because you already knew that, hey, this project might get enough points for a LIHTC deal. And now you just kind of serving it up on a silver platter, even though you might not have built anything. So I just want people to understand, be creative, please. This is what this podcast is for. Will has just shared value, millions of dollars easily with all of you guys. So use this knowledge, please, and turn it into something. And just if just one person listens to this and this changes your life, God, my life would be complete. But thank you, Will, for just continuing. So keep going for the site selection stuff. What other big considerations are there that people should be aware of?
So you have like if it's like a QCT, Qualified Census Tract, or a difficult development area, DDA, you get points for those, a maximum of 10 points, or if there's a CRP, Community Revitalization Plan, or some sort of like government revitalization program, or something that they have as far as like the local or even state programming, or that's where you want to be able to do your due diligence and see if where the site is located, if there's any additional incentives or part of a bigger plan. So maximum of 10 points, you get 5 points for each one of those. And then the other one that I really like is community Wi-Fi. It's if you provide community Wi-Fi, you get 15 points. Hey, residents love this. Let me tell you, I've been on sites as well, and I'm able to go over there and I hook up to it. It's awesome. And then if you're able to get like below market loans or local support. So that's really the biggest thing. It's like you want to create a development, get connected, because the people that are in office or that are working there and that are in these positions, they want to see affordable housing. So if you're able to get them behind you and get their support, hey, that you also get points for that. Now, something that will be sunsetting on this QAP is the subsequent phase. So if you have your initial like development and you planned it from the start, like, hey, we're going to do 2, 3, 4 different phases. If you had that plan from the start, you get an additional 10 points over here. And then senior and family, if you're doing 55 or 62 and over, you get 20 points. Or if you're doing family, you need to have a certain amount of 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms in order for you to be able to get like an additional points. And then smoke-free developments, you get a maximum of 5 points. Energy efficiency, they have like different tiers. You're able to get up to 10 points. And here's the big one, increase in extended use period for home ownership. You get a maximum of 20 points. So it's like
Wow.
5 points for every like 5 years. So everyone is deferring it to the max so that way they could get the maximum amount of points. So let me go to setbacks. So part of the land use restriction agreement, the LURA or declarative affirmative uses and everything, you have a requirement of 15 years, which is the initial compliance period. And then after that, you have the extended use period, which is year 15 through 30 or 16 through 30. Usually there's a lot of different exit strategies that you're able to have when it comes down to as far as like exiting the development or the project. But with the extended use period, that states, hey, no matter what, this apartment complex, this project has to stay affordable for the next 30 years.
And that is tied to the property in the deeds, right? So it's
Correct.
not you can just change it up and say, oh, I sold it, doesn't apply anymore. Nope, that carries through to the next buyer. Okay.
Yeah, it runs with the land.
Got it. And maybe this is a good time to ask this question then. Like, when you have these tax credits, right? Do you just sell them on an open market? Like, what do you even go to turn these tax credits into money? Do you just go directly to the banks? Tell us a little bit more about who do you have to go through and what does that process even look like for selecting somebody to help you?
So for the most part, there are syndicators out there that will look at this and they're going to be pricing out the tax credits. Now, the tax credits right now, they're going anywhere between 86 to 93 cents a dollar. So what that means right here is,
for those of you that are listening on audio, you guys can go to youtube.com/@Kent_HE and you can see Will actually go through this example because, again, Will is providing you guys with millions and millions of dollars of value right now. It's not investment advice, obviously, and we're not soliciting any investments, but this is so crucial for you to understand practically and process-wise, like what does it actually mean to pull together a deal?
So over here, we have $50 million right here on the initial eligible basis. And let's say you're selling it for 87 cents a dollar. Let's just keep it simple. It's 90 cents a dollar. So $50 million is a qualified basis, and then you multiply that by 4%, which is a tax credit rate. That's $2 million in federal LIHTC money right there. And the way that it works is that you get that for the next 10 years. So in reality, it's over 15 years, but you're able to collect it in 10 years. Those $2 million become $20 million of equity right there. And then whatever you're going to be selling them off at, like over here, 90 cents, now you get almost $18 million in equity. 1 cent does make a pretty big difference. Especially right now, if you're looking anywhere between 87 cents to 93 cents, that's over $1 million difference right there, just between the gap of what they're going for right now. Now,
Got it.
let's just say that we have 90 cents, and this is why the location of the site is very important, especially if it's on the Qualified Census Tract or DDA. With that basis boost, we're going over here from almost $18 million in equity. And now with the boost, we went to $23.4 million.
Ooh, this is good. So I want to make sure this is super clear for people, right? This is why they are incentivizing developments in areas that might be qualified census tracts or difficult to develop area, because it's hard to develop for a reason. And for them to incentivize this, they have to help you out on the capital raise part, specifically by providing you with more equity through the sale of these tax credits. And Will just showed that you went from 18 million to 23.4 million, almost a $5 million difference. But that's a huge number. That's $5 million you didn't have to borrow. That's $5 million you didn't have to go raise from a private lender or investor. And that's what makes this all kind of come together. And for the initial eligible basis, right, 50 million, that's not necessarily the entire cost to build the project, right? That's just the eligible basis. What types of costs are ineligible, I guess, well, for lack of better words?
Yeah. So the types over here that are ineligible, any type of project reserves, they're going to be ineligible.
And these are like contingencies, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. So any type of money that you're able to earn interest on, that's going to be ineligible, like lease-up reserves, operating reserves. Those are really the main ones. And then additionally, any type of miscellaneous soft costs. Sure. Yeah. Miscellaneous soft costs. So any type of contingency money. Unfortunately, over here with this QAP, tenant relocation costs are not considered as part of that. And then
that could be really expensive. Tenant relocation costs.
Yeah. And then, of course, FF&E, personal property, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, for those that didn't know. So marketing, apartment fees, and any other additional miscellaneous costs. And then syndication costs.
And syndication costs are like the transaction, or maybe we'll call like a broker fee that you pay to the syndicator that sells the tax credits to the buyers.
I like that. Yes, exactly.
Got it. Right. Man, that was really helpful. Thanks for pulling that up. That literally helped people understand and follow along your process. And they got to see a live example of how that tax credit that they got can be turned into actual money that can be paid off today. And you highlighted perfectly that it's $2 million over 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the present value that Will was alluding to earlier on why you don't get exactly 20 million. It's a present value. And they also pay you a certain number per dollar of tax credit.
Right. Time. Yeah. And you could go into like the whole carrying costs and the whole discounting factor, but that's all additional like calculations if you really want to delve into that. Yeah.
Man. All right. So we talked about tax credits. We talked about equity. In terms of debt financing, I mean, what are we talking about? You talked about bond financing earlier and traditional with the 9%. What are you seeing in the market nowadays? What are you seeing in terms of debt that people have been acquiring for these types of projects? What kind of terms are you seeing nowadays?
Yeah, so for debt right now, for like the 9%, that really varies. We saw interest rates going as low as like 6%, and it's going up as high as like 7.5%. So once again, you need to realize that it all comes down to CLTV and LTV when you're mapping that out. And these, you have more equity, so it's going to be less the amount that you're going to be borrowing for your primary mortgage. Then, of course, you have different soft funds. Really, when it comes down to debt, that's the amount that we're seeing. And then when it comes down to the bond side of financing, I mean, we're seeing anywhere from like 4% up to like even 9%, depending on like if it's subordinate financing and whatnot. So it just really depends on the lien position.
Oh, okay. Got it. And are these bonds or that's funding these projects, are these tax exempt too? So the interest on these bonds are exempt from federal income taxes?
Yes. So that's an excellent question. And it just really depends on what you map it out, because sometimes if you're underwriting it, and let's say you're like, hey, we're going to need this much, but in reality, anything that goes in excess of your allocation will be taxable. So that's why it's important to underwrite it correctly, kind of like sharpen your pen twice, I guess.
No, that's exactly right. All right. This podcast has been packed with so much information, man. I got to let's maybe talk about the exit strategy, because you referred to some forms earlier. And I really want to understand, okay, for these low-income housing tax credit projects, like what are some of the exit strategies that you've seen work? And maybe we can just go through the highlights of like pros and cons of each type of exit strategy. That would be tremendously helpful, Will.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And once again, as I said before, it really depends on your situation. So you could just go with like a traditional sale of the property, which is the most basic option. And of course, the LURA, the land use restriction agreement, will continue with the property as it rents with the land, and it'll run through the extended use period. Additionally, the state out or allocating agency will have to approve the transfer or sale of the property. The other option would be like going through a contract. And what that is it gives the property owner the opportunity to terminate the income and rent restrictions. And it also, you're able to apply for that like on day one of year 14 if you're able to, depending on whatever is stated in LURA. There's still a whole deregulation period and everything. And what that really does is you get a calculation of, hey, this is how much the property's worth. You put it up on the market, the state agency will like advertise it, and it's on there for sale for 1 year. If someone buys it for the qualified contract price, then the person will buy it, and then they'll have an election to either keep the rents as they are or bring them all up to 60% AMI, and then it'll still continue through the extended use period as an affordable housing project. Or if no one buys it, then that's when you're able to remove the restrictions, go through the whole deregulation period, and then you're able to charge market rents.
Oh, so it's almost similar to like a right of first refusal. Like let somebody else buy it for the intention of keeping it as affordable housing. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, in that aspect, it is. Anyone, the open market has a first right to be able to purchase it. Yeah, I like that analogy.
Okay, cool. I'll just make it up as I go. As I go. Thank you for helping me understand.
And then the other thing is, which is very common, is the sale of a partnership or membership interest, where you're able to sell it to like a related party. Usually by this time, you got to remember the equity investor, they want to be out of it. That way they could take the money and buy something else where they're going to be able to get the tax credits. Because over here, you're also running up your liability. And of course, this is all about mitigating liability and being able to produce and build more affordable housing. So you have the general partner option of purchase, the investor's interest. If there's a nonprofit, you could have the nonprofit general partner right of first refusal. You could have an investor put option. So there's a lot of different options when it comes to a partnership within the partnership or even just selling it outside of the partnership.
Interesting.
And
So the people that bought the tax credits, all right, they are the equity investor.
mhm.
And this might be a really obvious question, but why do those investors want to get out of it at that point? Is it because they already only got 10 years of tax credits and they're like, okay, this is it? What does that look like?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it comes down to that really, because it's really you're liable for 15 years of the tax credits. You get a upfront in the 10 years, but it's really goes through and you're responsible for maintaining. That's why it's called the compliance period. You need to be compliant with all the statutory and federal regulations that are involved with owning and maintaining affordable housing or LIHTC properties. If for some reason, let's say year 16 comes around, there's deficiency or something like that, guess what? The investor is also on the hook for that. So usually they want to be able to exit as soon as possible.
So
Sooner the
they
better
kind
for
of want to
them.
wash their hands because they're like, okay, I don't want to be an owner of this property if the benefit for me already got exhausted.
Right, absolutely. And then there's other properties that are like generally for the most part, these developments, affordable housing, you're losing money. So you have your owner equity that you have, and as they're going through the years, it's going down and you're losing the money and your interest is reducing, and then you have to put more money in. And depending on, again, it really depends on how the operating agreement or limited partnership agreement is set. It'll identify the responsibilities there. So for the most part, the investor member or limited partner will have that responsibility or bears that burden.
Ooh, this is good. So what is the tax credit resyndication?
And that was the next one that I was going into is the syndicate, where this allows the owner of the existing LIHTC property to apply for new tax credits. And I must mention that 40 to 60% of LIHTC properties actually do resyndicate. And this is from the National Association of Home Builders. And on that aspect, there's two options within the resyndication. You could sell the property to a new investor, which would be an acquisition rehab or acquisition rehabilitation, which we call rehab, or you could just apply for tax credits based on the cost paid for the repairs. And that's just a rehab light tax only.
So
And
in order for you to get the tax credits again, right? So assuming you're selling to a new owner, is that person that's trying to buy this property, reapplying and trying to score the points they actually get LIHTC to buy it from the existing owner?
Oh, you see, that's the interesting part. Yeah, that you said rescoring, you could do a 9% rehab. But on the acquisition part, you only get 4% tax credits. On the rehab part, you get the 9% if you earn the award.
Oh, say that one more time. So there were two options, right? One is selling the property to a new investor. That's the
Mhm,
ACK rehab. Or you just
mhm.
apply for the tax credits, which is just a rehab. But is that the existing owner that's applying for just a
Yes,
rehab cost?
correct.
Oh, so that's why it's beneficial to just apply for 9%, assuming you can get it, just to kind of back up your property and catch up on deferred maintenance that you've incurred over the past couple of years, if you had any.
Well, that's an interesting part because I really haven't seen any just rehab light 9% light tech applications come through. Everything that I've seen has been like for acquisition rehab.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah, my wheel's turning now.
Interesting. Okay. Well, for the ACK rehab, that's usually selling to a new buyer or a new operator that wants to buy the properties, but they also have to apply for the 4% tax credits. But it's non-competitive. Do they typically get awarded the 4% tax credits to
Yeah, if
buy these
they're just going
projects?
to do the 4%, yeah, absolutely. It's non-competitive. As long as there's volume cap, you're
Mm.
good. As long as you get that allocation, you're fine.
Got it. So the problem still exists in terms of, are you able to raise the debt to cover the rehab? Can you raise the rents based on a rent comparability study to actually catch back up to market rent so that you can actually fund and service the new debt that you're taking on, even though you're getting the 4% tax credits?
Well, you would have to be like with the ag rehab, you would still have to, you got to remember that the rents go up as well. So you have
Got it.
your income and rent guidelines as well, income and rent limit. And that's published by who then Arizona Department of Housing over here. They'll redistribute and then everyone is able to see that. And those are the rents. And then you just have to let people know like, hey, these are the new rents. This is when they're taking effect. However, if you're in a contract, it'll take effect at your new contract after contract expiration and things like that, which you still need to do the TIC, the tenant income certification. So the whole management of affordable housing is like, there's a whole lot that goes along with that as well. But you need to make sure that both the development and the management company are both talking to one another because this is the very important part because you definitely want to stay in compliance when it comes to the acquisition and rehabilitation of properties.
Ah, okay, got it. So if I had to follow the sequence again, then if someone's trying to sell their property, right, they would kind of list it on that public exchange you were talking about. Someone could say, okay, that property is for sale. Let me go start applying for the 4% tax credit so I can buy the project and become the new owner. Is that what you typically see in that process, or is it like a kind of off market shadow market?
Well, well, I mean, there's times, I mean, just owners talking within one another. They're like, hey, I'm thinking about selling. They're like, I'll buy it. Arm's length deal, non-related parties. That's usually how it happens, or it'll go up for sale through a brokerage. They'll list it for sale. The qualified contract listing, that's a whole separate thing. That's ran through the department. That's if someone's trying to get rid of the LURA, the rent restrictions.
Got it. Okay. This has been tremendously helpful, man. I mean, this sometimes it seems too good to be true, right? Well, I mean, are there any other like big risk factors that or people that are not as experienced with LIHTC? Like, what should they know about it? Like, what's the difficult parts of it or downsides of pursuing a LIHTC project?
Oh man, I would have to say that the risks are really the same as a regular development. And I'm going to have to quote Mark Staff, who's the director, and the Freddie Taylor Professorship in Real Estate and the director for the Master of Real Estate Development program at Arizona State University. So first off, we have to know what risk is. And risk is the probability of something happening or not happening. And then he breaks it down into two different types of risk, systematic risk and systematic risk. So the systematic risks are market risks that cannot be diversified away, interest rates, recessions, wars, things like that. And then you have your unsystematic risks, which are specific risks, like risks specific to individual assets, as they can be diversified away in a portfolio. Represented components of a return that is not correlated with general market moves. So there's different shifts and everything. So wanting to be able to control as much risk and anticipate as much as you can. And of course, there's the other thing that's known as the black swan or in how real estate developers think. That's a great book, by the way. I recommend everyone to read that. They call it the third punch. So it's the one thing that was unanticipated, which recently we all experienced COVID. And that was definitely a black swan right there.
Yeah.
So
And you have, especially if you have residents that are not on vouchers, right? And there's no guaranteed rent. I mean, there were people that could not pay rents and drain your operating reserve budget if you did not prepare adequately for it. So yeah, you got a lot of help up front, but these events, they can take down a property. Not,
absolutely.
and sometimes there's something you just can't control. So, man, well, this has been such a great podcast episode, man. I've learned so much to kind of tie everything together, man. Is there like an example or a sample project that you don't have to name a specific name, project or city, but like just in general numbers, like what have you seen LIHTC done like for a project? Like what type of impact and what type of unit count have you seen kind of come through your desk that you supported?
Oh man, I see anything from like 80 units. I mean, once again, I see everything from acquisition rehab to new construction, and I deal in all aspects of LIHTC. But yeah, right now, just getting land is really for the right price and just getting everything to pencil out. So larger projects are becoming more common now as you need to be able to, it needs to be able to pencil out.
So
And
in order to pencil, you need the more units, right, to kind of make it work.
exactly. Yeah, the more
Got it.
density, absolutely.
Got it. Well, there's one more question that I like to ask everyone on the podcast, and that's just, hey, why do you think affordable housing, particularly the lack of supply of affordable housing, is like kind of so hard to solve for? What are your thoughts? No right or wrong answer.
I mean, I personally think it's one, it needs projects just like anything, they all need to make some money. So if you have an affordable housing project that you're not able to make money on it, just not even, I'm not even saying like they make a lot of money, because even like the amount of money that, as I was going, there's all this subordinate debt and everything. So it's just expensive. It really is. I mean, everything has been going up, cost of construction, rents have been going up. And granted, if you're looking at projects that use FMR, the fair market rents, to be able to determine certain prices, if you're on like voucher programs and things like that, that's good, because that actually helps, especially when it's subsidized, to be able to pay the project. And then that also allows them to be able to build more. But yeah, ultimately, it's just cost and the cost of capital right now.
Man, that's so helpful. And man, I sincerely appreciate you for what you do, man. Without people like you, I would have never had the home I grew up in. If there wasn't someone like you guiding these developers along and helping them think through how can they possibly put all this huge project together, man, I would have never had the home I grew up in. I grew up in a 13th floor building, and I knew that there were significant challenges to make that deal come to life. And without people like you coming on here and wanting to teach others, man, I don't know what a world would be. So I appreciate you so much, Will. I sincerely thank you for your time. And for people that want to reach out to you or find out more about you, where can they get in touch with you, Will?
I'm really active on LinkedIn. Which is
That's where
you
I
found
found
me.
him.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, no, reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a message, connect with me. I'm here to help. I'm very passionate about affordable housing, and if there's anything that I can do to help, reach out.
And he's a great explainer. And hey, well, how many like projects or units have you been a part of now? Hundreds, thousands? What do you think?
Oh man, I really wish I had a count.
If you had to say thousands.
Yeah, I'd have to say thousands.
Man, if you want to learn from a guy that's helped thousands of units get projects approved and want to learn how it works, please make sure you follow Will on LinkedIn, reach out to him, learn from him. Well, thank you so much, man. I cannot wait to have you back on when you're taking on some more projects, and man, we should just keep chopping it up, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Kent, thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And hey,
I cannot wait till you launch your podcast, man. Seriously, this is going to be so fun. All right. Well, thank you so much for your help, and we are out.